As I mentioned at the beginning of the service, we have two distinguished guests with us tonight from the organization Roots, or Shorashim, who will be speaking tonight, both briefly during the service in just a few moments, and then for an hour-long presentation immediately after services. And I would like to introduce both speakers at this time, share a little bit about them before I turn over the bima. Our first speaker, or our first presenter, is Hanan Schlesinger, who is a Palestinian born and raised in the Gaza Strip to a refugee family originally from the town of Majdal in historical Palestine, which is today within the borders of the state of Israel and known as Ashkelon. Growing up, Hanan never interacted with Israelis except when the Israeli air forces bombed Gaza. His negative experiences of war, alongside his bitterness and suffering due to what his people went through in 1948, made him angry and bitter towards the people he had perceived as his enemy. In 2014, after he moved to the West Bank, he dared for the first time to meet an Israeli in one of the settlements of Gush Etzion. The meeting was with one of the participants in Roots and took place right next to the Roots Dignity Center. Through that meeting, Hanan began to see how misinformed he was about the narrative of Israeli Jews. After a long struggle with ideas and two narratives, he became convinced that only through coexistence and recognition of the other side's legitimate connection to the land will we ever achieve peace. In 2019, Hanan met with our other speaker, Rabbi Hanan, and together they started meeting with groups of Palestinians and Israelis in the north of the West Bank to foster civil grassroots dialogue between both peoples. Through these meetings was born the northern branch of Roots. In January 2021, Hanan moved to Washington, D.C., where he is currently finishing his master's program, 1 month away, I believe, in comparative politics at the American University School of Public Affairs. Prior to that, he has obtained a bachelor's degree in biblical studies back in Palestine. He is also a fellow at the Philos Project. And for the honor of introducing our second speaker, Rabbi Hanan Schlesinger, it's my honor to invite up a member of this community, Evan Schreier, who met with Roots and learned about this organization when Evan was on a trip to Israel last summer and was so impressed that he emailed all of us at the synagogue, all of us rabbis, and said, "You need to bring Roots." And then he emailed us again because, it takes us a few times. But Evan was persistent. And one more thing about Evan before I allow him to introduce our speaker. I asked Evan to do this, to read from this sheet. Yeah. He's confirming 3 minutes ago. I think it was 5, but we'll go back to the tape after. But regardless, and Evan is the kind of person who said yes. You wouldn't have done that. I wouldn't have done that. Evan did that. So bravo to him. And Evan, please, if you will introduce our speaker, and then we will hear from Rabbi Hanan.
Hanan Schlesinger is an Orthodox rabbi, teacher, and passionate Zionist, settler who had been profoundly transformed by his friendship with Ali Abu Awad and other Palestinians. His understanding of the reality of the Middle East conflict and of Zionism has been utterly complicated by the parallel universe that Ali and others have introduced him to. Originally hailing from New York, Rav Hanan made Aliyah, ascending to the land of Israel, on his own at the age of 20, and has lived over the Green Line in Alan Shvat, Gush Etzion, for over 30 years. He spent 10 years learning in Israeli Talmudic seminaries and has also studied towards a master's in Jewish philosophy at Hebrew University. His professional career has been dedicated to teaching Jewish studies in various colleges and seminaries in the Jerusalem area, as well as in different frameworks in Florida and Texas. It was in Dallas about 15 years ago that he became involved in interfaith work, first with Christians and then with Muslims. There he founded Faiths in Conversation, a framework for Jewish, Christian, and Muslim theological dialogue. The mind-expanding experience of those trialogues inspired him to attempt to meet Muslims and Christians back in the Holy Land. Although always drawn to pluralism and deeply empathetic for the other, and sporadically involved in the religious peace movement over the course of the past 3 decades, Rav Hanan had never formed a personal relationship with a Palestinian until he returned to Gush Etzion from Dallas about 7.5 years ago. The meetings that began then have become far more meaningful than he ever could have imagined. He found himself part of a small team that founded Root Shorashim and has dedicated himself to bringing reconciliation to that tiny sliver of land that both Israelis and Palestinians call home. On a personal note, last summer, I was able to travel with BBYO to Israel for 3 weeks, where we met with Rav, and one of his colleagues at the Roots office, and it was really life-changing. The purpose of the trip was to gain a better understanding of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and they were one of the last organizations and speakers that we had met with, and I don't think that my understanding would be where it is today if it wasn't for them. So I'm honored to have them here today.
Rabbi Hanan, please, if you will join us now. Thank you.
That was great. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. And thank you so much for welcoming us, myself and Khalil, into your congregation. Listen to this insane situation. Israeli Jews and Palestinian Arabs live so close together in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, but so far apart. When I say close together, I mean geographically. And when I say far apart, I mean in every other sense of the word. We live in different, separate towns, villages, cities. We speak different languages, different religions, different cultures, different histories. But more than that, we have separate health systems. The doctor, the dentist, the hospital, Palestinians here, Israeli Jews here. We have different transportation systems, taxis, buses, separate. The health system, whether it is I said that already, right? Educational systems, whether it's the preschool, whether it's up all the way to college, everything is separate. Different municipalities, the people who pick up my garbage don't pick up the Palestinian garbage. And of course, we also live under different legal systems. I'm an Israeli citizen with full rights, civil rights, human rights, and the Palestinians who live 5 minutes from me are citizens of no country with no civil and human rights. Under these circumstances, of course there's going to be ignorance of the other. There's also bigotry, stereotypes, perhaps what we would call in American language racism, and lots of resentment and fear. This fear becomes part of our identities. You're not a normal, regular Palestinian if you're not afraid of Israelis. And you're not a normal Israeli if you're not afraid of Palestinians. This fear and resentment kills. It causes people to kill and be killed. And we've seen witness to that in the terrible news of the past few days. I'm not finished with the bad news. There's more. There's no common ground. And I don't mean that as a metaphor. I mean ground. There's no common ground. There's no common geography. You see, there's a big red sign at the entrance to Palestinian villages, all of them in the West Bank, and it says that Israeli, that means me, Israelis cannot enter. It's forbidden by military law. And the entrance to all of the Israeli towns, cities, villages, settlements in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, there's a guard who knows his job is to prevent Palestinians from entering, except if they're menial workers under armed guard during work hours accompanied by their employers. But had there been a strange Israeli and a strange Palestinian that wanted to have a cup of coffee together, there's no place to do it. There's just about no common ground. And then, a little bit over 8 years ago, we founded Roots, in Hebrew Shorashim, in Arabic Judur, the Israeli-Palestinian grassroots initiative for understanding nonviolence and transformation. And at the center of Roots is Merkaz Karama. Merkaz is a Hebrew word that means center. Karama is an Arabic word that means dignity. The Dignity Center brings together the two languages, the two cultures, the two enemies. Merkaz Karama, the Dignity Center, is the only joint Israeli-Palestinian community center in the whole West Bank, Judea and Samaria. It's the only place where the two sides can and do meet each other every day to go beyond the demonization, to find the human being on the other side, and also to discover a human being that has a very different, particularistic, national, cultural identity than I have. Our activities include study together, monthly lectures on the religion, the politics, the culture of the other side. We have day camps, we have summer camps, we have photography workshops, we have music workshops. We have a youth group. We have women's groups, we have men's groups, we have interfaith celebrations. So many times, people come up to me at the end of activities and they say, that was great. I say, what was so great? They say, you see that person over there? I talk to them. Just to talk to someone on the other side, the enemy that you've never met before, is liberating. You begin to get beyond what I call the hubris of exclusivity. The hubris of exclusivity, that disease, that virus that infects us with the sense that only my people are human, the other side is not exactly human. Only my people belong here. Only my people belong to this land, and the other side, no. The other side doesn't have any truth, any connection to the land. At the Dignity Center, we begin the process of healing, overcoming that exclusivity, expanding our identities to appreciate and to recognize and actually to love and to cherish the other side. It's really powerful and it's really, really difficult. There's so much prejudice, there's so much separation to overcome. That's an introduction. In another few minutes, Halil and I will tell our personal stories of how we began in a place of exclusivity, of prejudice, of not knowing the other side, and through the people-to-people meetings, the human connection, the hearing of the other side's story, identity, history, we've come, both of us separately and also together, to expand our sense of what's true, what's legitimate, and our sense of who belongs in that land. It turns out, and it's so hard for Israeli Palestinians to come to this conclusion, it turns out that Israeli Jews belong in that land. Palestinians also belong in that land. That land is Palestine. That land is Israel. That land is twice promised. And we both have to find a way to live together in recognition and reconciliation in that little sliver of land that is home to both of us. Shabbat Shalom.